Hey guys, welcome back to my neck of the woods. My name's Dika, where I share my experience and my knowledge, hoping to lessen your learning curve. So today, I'm going to talk about blood tracking deer tips. If you clicked on this, I encourage you to watch the whole video because there's a lot of information that I'm going to give you, and I think it's going to help you. Obviously, if you clicked on this, you're looking for some tips. You're looking for some advice. Maybe you had trouble tracking a deer or whatnot, and hopefully this can help you. Now, I don't know everything. This is just based on my experiences and a lot of my mistakes, really, over the years, and how I have gotten better at blood tracking. All right, so before I get started, please sub the channel, like my videos, and make some comments. So, blood tracking deer. It starts at the arrow. It starts at the arrow where, most of this is archery. A lot of gun hunting. I don't know if there's tracking. I don't gun hunt, so. But as far as archery, it starts at the arrow. It starts at recognizing, first of all, if you can find the arrow. Sometimes you can't find the arrow. And in recognizing what type of shot you had. What type of blood is at the site, what type of blood is on the arrow, whether or not a gut shot, a liver shot. And that's going to depict how long you wait until you give that deer time. What I do normally is after I shoot the deer, say it's at night or in the morning or whatever it is, I go and investigate the area where I shot probably about a half hour after I shot the deer. And I'll look around and see if I can find first blood. And if I can find first blood, I back out and I give the deer at least an hour. And then I come back in, try to come back in with friends because I think more eyes are better than just two. And if it's night, we got flashlights and lights and whatnot. Obviously, I'm always listening to see if there's a deer nearby and if I spook it. All right, so it starts at the arrow. And you want to mark your first blood. So whatever your first blood is, toilet paper works really good. White toilet paper because it'll disappear as it rains and as weather moves in. So start with toilet paper, put it right at first blood. So when you come back in the dark or whenever it is, you can pick up that first blood. So you do that. You come back in, and you want to start tracking the blood, and you don't want to get ahead of yourself because you don't want to step on a leaf and lose some blood or whatnot. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll find the line, and if, say I get to blood, right, and it's not the best blood, right, and I'm losing it, but there seems to be a definitive line. I'll take a big C-shaped crescent moon around it and look out in front of that line to see if I can find more blood there, as opposed to just walking on the same path over and over, and you may be stepping on blood that you're missing. You understand? All right, so start your track and start marking your track as you go, and you want your last blood. So you get to another spot, and this is your last blood, and then you move on, and then that's your last blood, and just so you can leave a breadcrumb of trail, so you can find your way back if and when you find that deer. It's helpful to follow the blood back because sometimes you got your head down and then you're in the middle of nowhere and you really don't know where you're at. It's very easy to get turned around in the dark. So what you want to do is you want to, say you're following pinpoints like match head size pieces of blood. In my experience, that could be a heart shot or it could be a non-lethal shot. So if you follow, I try to follow it for I don't know, maybe 50 yards or 100 yards. 100 yards, I think, is almost pushing it. Because if the deer isn't dead inside of 100 yards, chances are it's a different type of hit that's going to allow more time for that deer to die, or it's just a non-lethal hit. Either way, you have to back out. You have to back out. There's a saying, when in doubt, back out. Now, there are two schools of thought. I necessarily don't agree with the other one, but it has been successful for other hunters, so it's worth mentioning. Some people push deer to death. That's what they do. They'll push that deer until it dies. They feel that, especially like if, say, the arrow didn't go all the way through and it's in there, or you didn't find the arrow. They feel that the more that deer moves, the more it's going to cause havoc inside the cavity, and the deer is going to die, potentially quicker or pushing it. I necessarily don't agree with that because deer are very resilient and they will run very, very far on no blood. I don't know how they do it. These are mistakes. I mean, I've tried to push deer and you're just following it for almost forever. There's one deer that I did push, but it was a different scenario. We started off with great blood, and then it started going uphill and over all these rocks and stuff like that. And what we were doing is we were pushing it. We were pushing it in a direction that it didn't want to go. We eventually found it 2 miles later and 4 hours later, but that's not ideal. That's not what you want. So when in doubt, back out. I know it's a saying, but it's a good saying. And another thing with blood tracking, say you're with buddies, right? And say the buddies are equally as good or the same at tracking blood as you are. Or just say that they're not, They don't have an emotional connection to that deer other than they're your buddies. Sometimes they'll say, you know what, this isn't lethal, man. We need to back out. And in your brain, you get your adrenaline. You want to find that deer. You want to find a dead deer. You got to listen to your friends. You got to listen to the people that you brought in there that you trust to track blood with you. And, they're not saying it to get you mad. They're just saying it because we've had the experience and we need to back out. We need to back out and give that deer time. A liver shot, if you recognize it's a liver shot, I don't know, I would say 6 to 8 hours. If you recognize it's a gut shot, I would say at least 12 hours. 24 hours would be best if you can. But a lot of people don't want to back out because it's going to rain the next day, or they're afraid of coyotes, or they're afraid of something getting to the deer. I'll tell you what, if you jump that deer and you push it, the chances of you finding that deer are nil to none. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying your percentage of finding that deer goes down dramatically if you jump it out of its bed, say a bed 80 yards from where you were. You need to recognize the type of blood that you're looking at before you get to that jumping. And so I'm going to give you some of my real life examples on how to recognize that blood. One is pin drops. If it's just pin drops here over and over and you've gone 80 yards and you still haven't found that deer, you need to back out and maybe come in the next day or the next morning in the light and look for, and what you're doing ultimately is looking for a dead deer. You can get on that blood again and maybe you can find it, but chances are that cavity's filling up and it's not a quick, sorry, I got an itch here. It's not a quick lethal hit. Even a heart shot, they're dead pretty quick, even though there's not a lot of blood all the time. Another thing is, so I had this experience just recently, and the deer was bleeding from both sides. And I knew that I had a pass through, but the sides, how I could tell, it was only 4 inches apart, as opposed to maybe a foot apart or a little bit more, which indicated that I hit that deer very low. I hit it low, maybe in the brisket, and I got a pass through, and we followed it for quite some time, and we needed to back out. It may die, but it's not going to die if I'm pushing it, even if it is a pass through and it's bleeding for both sides. So that's a misconception. If you pay attention to what you see on the ground. What you see on the ground, it's going to tell a story, and whether or not you pay attention to it, that's the problem. So we paid attention to that the deer was bleeding from both sides. It was a pass through, but I might have hit it a little low. It wasn't a heart shot. It might have died, but we felt it was a non-lethal hit. So we backed out. Like I said, it was on both sides, and it was the drops or the quarter size areas were bright red blood, no bubbles in it. Bubbles kind of indicate that it's oxygenated blood. You should also learn the difference between liver blood, which is very, very dark, a gut shot, and arterial versus venous blood. Venous blood is a darker red, and arterial blood, which is in the lungs and the heart area, is a bright, bright red. A lot of times it has bubbles in it because it's oxygenated. But anyway, you have to get past, I need to find that deer. That is the most important thing in my opinion. And when you back out, you give that deer is going to lay down, going to lick its wounds. And if it's going to bleed out, it's going to bleed out. If it's not a lethal hit, it's going to lick its wounds and it will close up and the deer will survive, which is better than a wounded deer. Knowing that, or thinking, we create this scenario in our heads as hunters that deer is dead. or I need to push that deer, or I need to find that deer. But that's not always the case. You really need to be a realist and be honest with yourself and say, what do I see here? What do the clues add up to? And if you think that deer is living and is gonna live, there's no need to track it anymore, right? Because it's still alive and it's not dead. As much as you push it, you know? So there's some other things, real life scenarios that you need to follow while you're tracking. Is sometimes deer, when they're not hit, like if it's a liver shot, where they're not going to die very, very quickly, they'll turn around, they'll backtrack. So you need to pay attention to that on the ground. So sometimes you'll see a dot. When you're following it, like say, oh my goodness, itch. Say the arrow didn't go all the way through, right? And you're following it, and you can see where the deer is walking, and all the drips or the blotches or whatever, it's on its right side. Right side, right side, right side. And then you get to a point where it's on the right and the left side. That means that deer turned around. You need to find where it went like this, and there might be one in the center. That deer turned around and is walking back on the same trail that you're tracking it. So you need to backtrack. It probably, like, so say whatever reason, you went up and you took a right, you know, and you're following, and then all of a sudden it backtracked, and you were just on that straight line. Turns out the blood went under a different direction, and you didn't even pick up on it. This has happened to me many, many times. I've seen this many, many times, and I usually find these deer now. And you have to listen to all the options that are out there. You can't just think that you know it all, and, you know, like if I tell a buddy I think it turned around and he doesn't believe me, there's really nothing I can do. So I'll just start tracking it in the other direction by myself. You know, I'll look for, even if it's not my deer, you know, I'll start tracking it that way. Thinking that I'm right. I might not be right, but if I can find it off the trail that we went to, hopefully we can help and we can find that deer. There's another thing that I want to talk about, and that is, like, you're going to see small drops, or you're going to see splatter, or you're going to see mouth spray, or you're going to see it's sporadic. You just want to pay attention to that, and that will initially or eventually help you find that deer over time. It's not always immediate. So if it's, say a deer gets a pass through, right? Pass through in the lungs, right? And it's up high. It's not down low. You're not going to get blood right off the bat. And if you do, you kind of have to wait for the blood to fill up in the cavity. And then when it does fill up, you're going to get that mouth spray. You're going to get a spray coming out of its mouth. Like, you might get some great blood at first, and then there's nothing. It's because the blood that was there has come out, and the cavity is beginning to fill up. You want to keep on that blood. And what you probably will see is you'll see it be sort of spraying or splattering out of the mouth. You'll see it in drops. You'll see where that deer had bed down. And that's another thing. When you're tracking your blood, if the deer has not bed down, if you've given adequate time, a couple hours or whatnot, and the deer is not bed down, and you're just following pinpoints of blood, chances are that hit may not be lethal, and you need to back out and maybe come back. Because if it's just cruising, usually a lethal hit or a more traumatic hit, like the liver or the guts or something like that, where it's going to take that deer time to die, it's going to lay down and make a bed and stay there and probably bleed out. Probably. But if you jump that deer, chances of finding that deer are slim, or at least the percentage lessens. The percentage goes down quite a bit. So those are some things that you want to look for. Hopefully this is helpful to you, and hopefully this helps people find more deer. These are just mistakes that I've made. There's one other thing that I want to mention, and sometimes we get good blood and we just run out of blood. A lot of people quit. And this is a time that you should not back out. If you get good blood, say for 100 yards or say for 200 yards, right? And you get good blood, and they say it's bleeding out of both sides, and all of a sudden the blood is gone and you can't find it. That deer is nearby dead. It ran out of blood, it one last run, or it panicked or whatever. But usually when you run out of blood and you can't find it anymore, and you didn't just walk up on the deer, that deer is normally nearby dead. That's a time not to back out, when you run out of blood and you've had good blood the whole time. All right? Hopefully this is helpful to you. I'll talk to you guys later. Be well, sub the channel. Thanks.